Thank you, Mr. Hillier. That's for the introduction and also for the invitation. So, not everyone will invite me places, so it's nice when an invitation shows up. Yeah, and when I'm actually allowed to speak, that's also good. So, I have a habit of not preparing my talks until really the last minute, and I mean, that's not exactly true because I've been thinking about what I'm going to talk to you about tonight for a very long time, but I really only got the title for this talk firmly in place about half an hour ago. And one of the things I like to do when I'm speaking to people is to tell them what I'm thinking about. Not what I've already thought about, you know, and certainly not what I know, but what I'm thinking about, what I'm trying to figure out. And so, one of the things that's happened to me over the last year, somewhat surprisingly, is that I've been invited to speak in front of a lot of conservative groups. And a lot of them were conservative groups that were composed of young people. And that was interesting, you know, because conservatism isn't something that's necessarily all that easy to sell to young people because they tend not to be that conservative to begin with. And conservatism also tends to have quite a lot to do with things that you shouldn't do instead of things that you might be allowed to do. And so there's a restrictive element of it that's also perhaps less attractive to young people than it might be. People do tend to get more conservative as they get older, as their personalities shift. And so, but what I saw was very interesting because I saw, and this was particularly true of young men, and I haven't quite puzzled that out yet, but you know, I would talk about what was going on in the universities and what I thought might constitute a reasonable antidote to that, and that was not only in the universities but also politically, and that was both the adoption of responsibility instead of the incredible and constant stress that's being placed on rights, and also the responsibility of the citizen to speak forward what he or she believed to be true, or at least to not speak what they knew to be false, which is at least a good place to start. And one of the things I found so remarkable was that this was actually a saleable message to young people. And that surprised me because, you know, you wouldn't necessarily think that you would turn a lot of lights on in a young audience by talking to people about truth and responsibility. I think if you went to a marketing agency and told them that that was going to be your political message to young people, they would tell you to go back and, you know, flesh out another plan, sketch out another plan. But maybe young people have been talked to enough about rights for maybe about the next 15 decades. That's what I would think. And so maybe there's a hunger arising among young people for something that has a little bit more respectability, let's say, and a little bit more depth than the constant emphasis on doing whatever you want whenever you want. Let's put it that way. The thing about that, and the thing about rights in general, the idea of rights is that rights don't really give you much direction, right? They tell you what you are in principle allowed to do, but they don't really tell you what you should do. And it actually turns out that you need to know what you should do because you need to do something, right? People are active, and our lives don't have any meaning without something to do and something that you should do. It can't just be something that you want to do. That's too shallow. There's no deep meaning. There's no enduring. There's no sustaining meaning in that. It's just impulsiveness, and maybe that's okay in some sense. Maybe that's entertaining, and maybe it's impulsively exciting and fun, and there's some utility in that for life. But life is a very difficult journey, let's say. It involves a lot of suffering, and it involves a lot of heavy existential weight, and you need to be able to put something of value up against that so that you can withstand your life, and you can stand up with some dignity, and you can contribute to your community, and you can feel that you're a worthwhile person, you know, in spite of all the things that you're doing wrong, and in spite of all the problems that you have. And so then people need to know what they should do, and one of the things they should do is take responsibility, and another thing they should do is try to tell the truth, because those two things help them live proper lives and then help society organize itself properly. And that's good for everyone. So it turns out that when you tell young people that, they're pretty damn happy about that. And so one of the things I thought I would do tonight is talk about what conservatives might have to offer to young people as a saleable message. You know, because the other thing I've learned over the last year, and this was quite revealing, let's put it that way. I'll start with a briefer story, just as a little intro to this. In the last 3 weeks, some of you may know that there was quite a political storm that emerged, particularly among journalists, over the issue of cultural appropriation. A number of journalists got in real trouble for transgressing the politically correct norms in relationship to cultural appropriation, a tremendously ill-defined and, let's call it, pathological concept. We could start with that. But the thing that was so interesting, and I think I probably talked to 10 of Canada's top 20 journalists, but that would be a reasonable estimate, most of them in print, but not all of them. Every single one of them told me that they were censoring themselves. Now you think about that, man. That's no joke. In a country like this, and these people, you'd think, well, if anyone has power, they have power. It's like, well, they don't really have power. They have competence and influence, and that's not the same thing as power. And they're bloody afraid of being hung out to dry if they say the wrong thing. You think about where our damn country is when the 10 most powerful journalists in the country are afraid to write and say what they think. That's not a good thing, man. That's not a good thing. I don't care what it is that they want to say or think. The fact that they're, not only did they tell me that they were censoring themselves and that they felt that they would be hung out to dry if they said the wrong thing, but they also told me that they were being censored by their editors. And so, you know, in a country that has a great tradition, right, and a tradition that's much longer than this country has been around, of freedom and free speech and free press, for us to be in a situation now where our major journalists are afraid that if they misstep inappropriately in this newfound political landmine, that they're going to be done. That is not good, right? That's a bad diagnostic sign. Okay, well, I said that story was a little intro to the other story I was going to tell you. And then, so I've been fortunate enough over the last several months to meet not the majority of the people who ran for the leadership of the federal Conservative Party, but most of them, including the people, the person who, Andrew, who recently won. And they all told me the same thing, which was also interesting, was that the Conservatives were afraid to be conservative, and for exactly the same reason. They were afraid that if they put forward valid conservative perspectives, that they would be isolated and mobbed and taken down. And that made them censor themselves and not be willing to speak up. And I thought, and I told each of them when we discussed this, the same thing was, if you guys are afraid to talk, you've already lost. You might as well just pack up and go home. It's done.